All right, let's take a look at this. Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar are back in the news. This is, we're going to hear a lot from these folks for the next year because, to a large extent, this is part of the electoral strategy in 2018 of the Republican Party, which is to demonize women of color and make sure that everyone understands that the Democratic Party is the women of color party. And so let's just start. Yesterday, there was a press conference at the Minnesota State House. Both Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar spoke. Here is Rashida Tlaib talking about her experience in Palestine as a young girl.
As a young girl visiting Palestine to see my grandparents and extended family, I watched as my mother had to go through dehumanizing checkpoints. Even though she was a United States citizen and proud American, I was there when my city was in a terrible car accident, and my cousins and I cried so she could have access to the best hospitals, which were in Jerusalem. I remember shaking with fear when checkpoints appeared in the small village of Bet Or el-Foka, tanks and guns everywhere. I remember visiting East Jerusalem with my then husband and him escorted off the bus, although he was a United States citizen, just so security forces could harass him. All I can do as my city's granddaughter, as the granddaughter of a woman who lives in occupied territory, is to elevate her voice by exposing the truth the only way I know how. As my Detroit public schools teachers taught me, by humanizing the pain of oppression.
And then Ilhan Omar came up and spoke more specifically about what this country can do, this country being the United States, to deal with the injustice that is the Israeli apartheid.
Fortunately, we in the United States have a constructive role to play. We give Israel more than $3 million in aid every year. This is predicated on their being an important ally in the region and the only democracy in the Middle East. But denying visit to duly elected members of Congress is not consistent with being an ally, and denying millions of people freedom of movement or expression or self-determination is not consistent with being a democracy. We must be asking, as Israel's ally, the Netanyahu government stop the expansion of settlements on Palestinian land and ensure full rights for Palestinians if we are to give them aid.
Now, before some of you send me an email telling me that I'm a self-hating Jew, and why is it that Tlaib and Ilhan Omar and we on the show, why do we criticize Israel when Saudi Arabia is so horrible? Why do we criticize Israel when Iran is so horrible or Syria is so horrible? Let me tell you what emails I never get. Why do you criticize the United States when there are so many other countries that are just as bad or worse? Like what? Because the point of criticizing, look, I don't know if South Africa was the most oppressive regime in the world at the time. Saudi Arabia is still probably pretty bad back then too. But the point being, because one, I have personally just far more invested in Israel than I do in Saudi Arabia emotionally. Two, we give obviously $3 billion of aid. to Israel. They are far more interconnected in our politics in many respects, at least publicly, than the Saudis. To the extent that the Saudis are, we criticize them. This is the notion that Israel is unique in getting criticism is a silly one in terms of the West or from where we sit.
Well,
I mean,
we
hold them to higher standards because we consider them the only democracy in the Middle East.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even think we could do that one ironically and as a joke anymore. But I mean, I'll acknowledge. I mean, look, I have a lot more emotional investment in Saudi Arabia, so that's extremely difficult for me to talk
Right.
about that elegant monarchy there and how the standards have fallen. But I think that, one is all the reasons that you outlined, absolutely. And even though we could say on a relative scale, there's no doubt that being in Saudi Arabia would, in the aggregate, be worse in many respects. Although, frankly, I don't know if you're Palestinian, but certainly if you're even an Arab as a second-class citizen inside 67 borders. But there is something very specific and very unique about apartheid conditions and about having a system that specifically administers two entirely different sets of rules for people based on their ethnic identity. And I mean that in some respects that is actually very unique in the world. Apartheid South Africa was unique. The Jim Crow South was unique.
Right.
Israel is unique. Western Sahara is unique. And I think now clearly Kashmir is becoming increasingly unique. And having a set of conditions like that if, literally roads for different people,
Right, that is
entirely
so
different
institutionalized.
justice
Right,
systems,
right.
that is radically unique.
There you go.